Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, wherever you are, those of you watching. This is Parashat Talk. I'm Avi Grossman, and thank you for joining us. Sorry, we've had some technical difficulties the last few weeks. Just to date this video, we're still in the midst of the corona panic, although things here in Israel certainly have improved, although there's talk of perhaps more or newer, a renewal of the restrictions and the lockdowns that we've seen until now. We hope and pray all of Klal Yisrael is protected, and in the merit of our Torah study and our keeping the commandments, we will be redeemed and saved from these and other misfortunes. This week is Parashat Balak. It's good to note that Balak and Bilam are presented as important people. Bilam is presented as the wise man, the prophet of the Gentiles. Balak is a king, and apparently, based on textual clues been pointed out by our sages and various commentators, that Balak became the king of Moab at that time because of a particular crisis. Based on textual evidence in other places, Balak was also a leader of the Ammonites at the time and of the Midianites. As a matter of fact, most things, starting from the beginning, most of the time when it mentions Sarai Moab or whoever is from Moab, you could assume that the Midianites are also involved, especially at the end when it says Jewish men were straying after the daughters of Moab. It's included, the Midianites are included. Why? Because then you see that the most prominent of those women who was involved ends up being killed, and she's a Midianite. We'll get to that shortly. Balak and Bilam apparently were not as understanding as, let's say, Esau himself. Why? Because Balak and Bilam, first of all, Bilam had no bone in this, had no horse in this race. He had no bone to pick. Bilam was a mercenary. Bilam was hired, and Bilam took the job because Bilam wanted money. He did not go out of his way, but when he was brought in. So Balak has something for him to do. It's Balak's fight, so he's going to join him. The funny thing about Balak and Bilam is that they could have chosen a different course of action. And what was that course of action? They could have asked Bilam perhaps to bless Balak and his people so that they would have success and be protected. After all, didn't Balak send to Bilam saying to him, I know that whoever it is that you bless is blessed, and whoever you curse is cursed. So what was his conclusion? Therefore, come and curse the people of Israel for me. Why didn't he say so? Therefore, bless me. He missed that opportunity. God keeps preventing Bilam. First, he tells Bilam, no, you cannot go curse the people because they are blessed. They already have a blessing. You cannot undo that, or you cannot reverse that. You cannot tack on a curse. So why didn't Bilam say, okay, but I would choose to bless the Moabites? Esau himself, when he lost the blessing that his father intended to give to him, instead it went to Jacob. So Esau was smart. He said, so bless me also, give me also a blessing. And indeed, Esau's blessing allowed him to actually overcome Jacob when the time came. And that's explicit in there. Isaac said, okay, when Jacob is unworthy, you will be able to overthrow his yoke, or throw his yoke from off your neck, and perhaps achieve independence or even dominate him. And indeed, symbolically, the Romans at certain points, and then the Catholic Church and other Christian groups celebrated the fact that the Jewish people were downtrodden, and that the Romans and their heirs. Sorry, I don't know who left it there. The Romans and their heirs continued to dominate the Jewish people for some centuries. But Bilam and Balak didn't think that. Apparently, that never crossed their minds. Bilam was told by God, no, you can't go and do that. And then God said, okay, fine, I'll let you go, but you have to do exactly what I say. You're going to be blessing the people. So Balak and Bilam keep trying, although every single time they never come across this idea. Perhaps they should try to do some good, bless themselves, and just give themselves an advantage and protect themselves, which is silly because Rav Kook points this out. The good people, they don't see to do harm to others. They just try to increase the good in this world. Spiteful behavior is a distinctly human behavior, and perhaps it's also very self-destructive. When people act spitefully, they end up hurting themselves even more. And that's what happened with Balak and Bilam. They should have thought perhaps they should ask for a blessing. Not only that, perhaps Amon and Moab were ready for the blessing. As we've pointed out in previous times, it seems that whoever was descended from Aver had the chance to, like the sages say in Pirkei Avot, the same Pirkei Avot that says you should be of the students of Abraham and not the students of Balak, of Bilam. They also point out that there were many generations that came and went, and Abraham came and took the reward that was waiting for all of them. He was the one who stepped up, and he was the one who maximized his potential. And anybody could have done that. Sometimes God knows that there's going to be a chosen one come from a specific line. It still was up in the air at a certain point. Aaron was chosen not in advance. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were not necessarily chosen in advance, but once they were chosen, it was limited to them. King David also, even the family of Yehuda, there were two dominant brands, two dominant strains in the family, the Kalev line, the Nachshon line. If you're reading clues in the Chumash, you would have said that, eventually the Davidic line is going to come from somewhere in Kalev. No, they're actually cousins. They're not. They branched off quite early in history. David comes from the first tribal leader, Nachshon, and not from Kalev. So we see that this blessing that was given to the sons of Shem and then the sons of Aver first passed to Aver's other son. Aver had a son, Peleg, who ends up being Abraham's ancestor, but it's the second son, Yoktan. Yoktan in Hebrew means someone will shrink him, or he will be shrunk, or he'll be minimized. Yoktan, ironically, has been pointed out, ended up having the most children. Yoktan has 12 children. That number is going to repeat because Nahor, who is Abraham's brother, Abraham's older brother, as a matter of fact, as I've pointed out, had also a number, 12 children, 12 sons. Ishmael is kicked out of Abraham's house, but God tells Abraham there's a sort of a consolation prize or a consolation reward. Shnei Masar Nisuim Yolid. Ishmael will give birth to, or will beget, 12 leaders, and it turns out there were 12 divisions among the Ishmaelites. All 12 of them are mentioned in the book of Genesis. And Esav also, if you look through the words very, very carefully there, you'll see that he has 12 dominant tribes within the Edomites, and a 13th one, which is Amalek, which sits separate from the rest of Esav. Also different halachic consequences for that. Further, we see that Jacob himself also had 12 sons, and that's the main blessing. But everybody related to Jacob, it seems, also gets 12 sons. And the Canaanites themselves. Canaan has 11 other tribes descend from him. And Canaan always stayed dependent. So you look through there, you see that there's 12 major Canaanite groups mentioned right before Yoktan's 12. And this corresponds to the fact that because they were initial chosen people, and the sages say whatever a servant or a slave acquires, his master acquires. So the land of Israel had to be in the hand of these 12 Canaanite tribes. Basically, the land was held in, what's the proper legal term? I forget now, but it was held in their hands for safekeeping for the time when the eventual legitimate 12 tribes, the masters, would come and take the land from them. Further, Abraham, through his third wife, Keturah, ends up having another 12 sons. You count it up, there's 6 of them mentioned. And then one of them, it says Yolad, which means that he had, just like Canaan, Yolad, it means he stayed his own separate tribe, and 2 of his sons ended up forming their own tribes. That's give us total of 5 plus another 2 is 7. And then Midian divides into 5. It doesn't say Midian plus his 5 sons. Rather, Midian's sons were, which means that Midian is divided into 5. And indeed, we see later in history, especially in the next parasha, we find that the Midianites were always considered 5 groups, and there's 5 Midianite kings of Midian, or heads. The exact word depends on which chapter of the Bible we're looking at. The point is that they weren't officially called kings. So even Midian enjoyed this, even the Bnei Keturah enjoyed this recurring blessing of 12 that God gives to the children of Shem and Aver because of their, or due to their familial association, however tenuous, with Abraham. But we do not see anything regarding Amon and Moab. We barely know, none of their children are ever mentioned. It just says Amon and Moab born. And then later we see that they've become their own national bodies. But we never see anywhere in the book of Genesis or anywhere else in the Bible who they were. The Ishmaelites, we know who they were. The Edomites, there's a lot of details about that. But the Amon and Moab, there is none, which is kind of strange. And perhaps that God was even waiting. It says that just like God gave a land, a heritage, he designated a place on this earth just for the children of Jacob. And he did the same for Esau, and he did the same for Ishmael, etc. He did the same for Amon and Moab. It says that the Jewish people were not to make war with the children of Lot because they were given their portion, and the children of Israel were not supposed to touch that and take it from them. Perhaps God had also intended that Amon and Moab step up and get their little piece of the blessing for their association with Abraham, and the fact that they also spoke Hebrew, and whatever else. There could have been a closeness, and even the Torah sort of blames them. The Torah says that there's 4 groups: Egypt, Edom, Ammon, and Moab, who get special consideration if converts come from their ranks, and that is the Edomites. They can't reject them for too long because, after all, they're the only national group called brothers to Jews, even though they're not Jews, and the Egyptians because they hosted us. But the Ammonites and Moabites are forever rejected from having pure lineage, even if they converted many generations ago. Why? Because of their spitefulness, because they hired, it says both of them, they hired Bilam to try to curse us, even though he wasn't going to succeed, and God foiled his plan and even gave us an extra blessing. And because they were supposed to greet us, they were supposed to help us on our way out of Egypt. They were supposed to preempt us and give us water and food. That's what they were supposed to do. But instead, not only does it say in the book of Judges, they didn't let us pass through their land. We had no threat to them, and they decided to try to attack us in the strangest ways. First to curse us, and then to trick us into sinning. And that brings us to the end of this parasha, where Bilam apparently gave some good advice to Balak. You can't commit wanton acts of carnality. Let me borrow that expression. And indeed, that is what happened. And it says that when the plague started, it doesn't even say there was a plague. It says that Pinchas killed the prominent Jewish man who brought a Midianite into the camp in front of Moses and the rest of the leaders. And it says that stopped the plague. 4,000 people had died in the plague. It never says the plague had started. It just says that God had gotten angry at the Jewish people and ordered Moses to gather the heads of the houses. We are experiencing technical difficulties, so please hold on 1 second so we do not get disconnected. I'm very sorry. Hold on. The broadcast will continue. Very hard here. It says that the plague had come to an end, but it never told us when the plague did start. And then it says that once Moses had been told they have to get some people executed, put on trial and executed for the crimes, it says that when this man brought the Midianites to the camp, it says that they were gathered and crying at the entrance to the tent of meeting. As we've seen other times, when it says Petach Olam Moed, doesn't literally mean at the entrance. It means they're in the sanctuary courtyard. What were they doing there? Why were they crying? One medrash says that they're crying because people were being taken out to be killed. I'd like to point out that this didn't happen overnight. It's not that there was an hour and these Midianite caravans came in and they set up shop and had their fare, and they were bringing in Jewish people, and then the next minute there's an orgy going on and a plague starts. These things took a little time. Perhaps it happened over the course of days and people begin to die, and that's when they realized that something was wrong, and that's why they called for prayer. I'm saying this because if we find people crying in the courtyard of the temple, it's usually because they were called together there because of a national emergency and to fast and to pray. There's precedent for this. It says it, for example, in the book of Jeremiah. I have it on the computer here in front of me. It says it here that in the 5th year, this is Jeremiah 36:9. Jeremiah, that's prophet Yirmiyahu, was told by God to write down all of his prophecies up until that point, send it with Baruch ben Neriah in a scroll, and read it in the temple on a fast day that they were going to call. So in the 5th year of Jehoiakim, that's Jehoiakim, king of Yehuda, in the 9th month, that would be Kislev, they call fast for all the people in Jerusalem. And during this fasting and day of prayer, Baruch got up and read, basically, just like on our fast days, we read from the prophets. We read sections mostly from, once again, the books of Jeremiah and Isaiah. So he read from the newest release, the proto book of Jeremiah. The complete book had yet to be written, but this is the beginnings of the book of Jeremiah. He read it to the people in order to admonish them, and this brought up quite a stir. The powers that be did not like the prophecies contained in this scroll. It also says about this in the book of Ezra that after their large celebration of the Tishrei holidays, they had Rosh Hashanah and the communal Sukkot. They gathered back together in the temple on the 24th of Tishrei, and they were fasting. It says they were wearing sackcloth. They put dirt on their heads, and they start confessing their sins, and they're crying in the courtyard of the temple over their sins. So too, it stands to reason that when it says here that the people and Moses and the leaders were crying at Pethach or Moed, it's because they were gathered there for prayer and fasting. And by the way, it also says when a court has to deliberate giving the death penalty or not, they're supposed to be fasting that day. Also, when they administer the death penalty, the members of the court are supposed to fast. So we understand why it is that they were crying at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Normally, in the temple and the courtyard of the temple, it's supposed to always be a state of happiness and gladness. Oz v'chedva b'mkumo. It's always the Kohen Gadol is always happy. He never gets impure from the dead. He never observes mourning. That's not the way of the temple. But in emergencies like this, that's what they saw, and that's why we have to see that Pinchas's reaction is all the more surprising and grave. Why? Because he acted out. He, of course, according to the Midrash, it says that he first sought Moses' approval, at least that the halacha was correct. But nowadays, we would strongly discourage any Pinchas's from taking action. If they see that there's a plague going on in the community, we don't want them taking action and killing anybody, or at least or doing anything even similar to that, or any violence. Things need to be considered a lot more. They need to be deliberated. They need a lot more time has to be spent. But it says here, it's been pointed out by the Dot Mikra, that the series of Vav HaYikuch verbs with regards to Pinchas indicates the haste with which he acted. And as the Gemara points out, perhaps it was also because of the danger. He could have gotten caught. There are many people who could have stopped him along the way, but he did what he did very fast. And that is what stopped the plague. I hope that without resorting to Pinchas-like tactics, we somehow find what it is that is affecting us, that we earn rightfully, that we merit to get over this current plague and all the other crises that are befalling our people, and that in that wake we live to also see what this generation saw less than a year after this whole incident, when they begin the conquest of the complete land of Israel, and that the land of Israel should remain in Jewish hands in its entirety, and that all of the Jewish people who find themselves in Arvot Moab or anywhere else in Chutz La'aretz come and find their way to the land of Israel and join in the count of the people who say that they wish to get a piece of the land. And thank you for this. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Send in your questions and comments. And don't forget, next week, I do not know if we're going to be doing this. If there's any questions that perhaps provoke, just like the questions that provoke this current presentation, so please send them right here. Have a good Shabbos.